For nearly 5 decades, America's role in the military coup that ousted Iran's elected prime minister and returned the Shah to power has been lost to history, the subject of fierce debate in Iran and stony silence in the United States. One by one, participants have retired or died without revealing key details, and the Central Intelligence Agency set a number of records of the operation. Its first successful overthrow of a foreign government had been destroyed. The Secret History, written by the CIA's chief coup planner and obtained by the New York Times, says the operation's success was mostly a matter of chance. The document shows that the agency had almost complete contempt for the man it was empowering, Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, whom it derided as a vacillating coward. And it recounts, for the first time, the agency's tortured efforts to seduce and cajole the Shah into taking part in his own coup. The operation, codenamed Pt.4, was the blueprint for a succession of CIA plots to foment coups and destabilize governments during the Cold War. The history says agency officers orchestrating the Iran coup worked directly with royalist Iranian military officers, handpicked the prime minister's replacement, sent a stream of envoys to bolster the Shah's courage, directed a campaign of bombings by Iranians posing as members of the Communist Party, and planted articles and editorial cartoons in newspapers. But on the night set for Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh's overthrow, almost nothing went according to the meticulously drawn plans, the Secret History says. In fact, CIA officials were poised to flee the country when several Iranian officers recruited by the agency, acting on their own, took command of a pro-Shah demonstration in Tehran and seized the government. 2 days after the coup, the history discloses, agency officials funneled $5 million to Iran to help the government they had installed consolidate power. The outlines of the American role in the coup were disclosed in Iran at the outset and later in the memoirs of CIA officers and other published accounts. But many specifics have remained classified, and the Secret History obtained by the New York Times is the first detailed government account of the coup to be made public. The coup was a turning point in modern Iranian history and remains a persistent irritant in Tehran-Washington relations. It consolidated the power of the Shah, who ruled with an iron hand for 26 more years in close contact with the United States. He was toppled by militants in 1979. Later that year, marchers went to the American embassy, took diplomats hostage and declared that they had unmasked a nest of spies who had been manipulating Iran for decades. The Islamic government of Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini supported terrorist attacks against American interests largely because of the long American history of supporting the Shah. Even under more moderate rulers, many Iranians still resent the United States' role in the coup and its support of the Shah. Since rising from the Ba'athist ranks as a hitman and political thug, Saddam Hussein seized power of the oil-rich state of Iraq. Shortly thereafter, despite being ardently anti-Zionist, Saddam was the CIA's local bully boy on the block in the Middle Eastern area and was used by the US to bleed Khomeini's newly revolutionary Iran in an expensive war. The Iran-Iraq War was costly indeed for both sides, which fought each other to a stalemate under World War I conditions. Swift tank movements were soon reduced to trench warfare and the use of poison gas was common. Iraq and Iran waged the War of the Cities, which was a multi-month slugfest of ballistic missiles between the capitals of Baghdad and Tehran. Many atrocities were committed on both sides. All this time Saddam was our boy. US officials like Rumsfeld fed armaments and information to the Iraqis to prop up their proxy war with Iran. After supplying the pre-revolutionary Savak secret police of Iran, the CIA now taught torture tactics to Saddam. This worked fine until Saddam started to poison gas his own people at Halabja with the help of his underling, Chemical Ali, and then invaded the neighboring rich oil kingdom of Kuwait, which had been stealing Iraqi oil reserves. Kuwait being a rich client state of the US and the corrupt regime of the Saudi royal family needing propping up in their own country, George H.W. Bush committed US troops to the Persian Gulf. After an initial build-up, Saddam's Warsaw Pact armed forces were driven from Kuwait in disarray back to their own borders. However, it was not in US interests to see their once ally Saddam toppled. They did not want a power vacuum existing to be filled by revolutionary Iran. Hence Saddam was left propped up like a straw man or Aunt Sally to be knocked down at any time with no-fly zones and sanctions. The battle in Iraq would be resuscitated for propaganda purposes with 9/11 and the War on Terror. The Iran-Iraq War began when Iraq invaded Iran on September 22, 1980, following a long history of border disputes and fears of Shia insurgency among Iraq's long-suppressed Shia majority influenced by the Iranian Revolution, mostly known as the Islamic Revolution. Although Iraq hoped to take advantage of revolutionary chaos in Iran and attacked without formal warning, they made only limited progress into Iran and within several months were repelled by the Iranians, who regained virtually all lost territory by June 1982. For the next 6 years Iran was on the offensive. Despite several calls for a ceasefire by the United Nations Security Council, hostilities continued until August 20, 1988. The last prisoners of war were exchanged in 2003. The war came at a great cost in lives and economic damage. 500,000 Iraqi and Iranian soldiers as well as civilians are believed to have died in the war, with many more injured and wounded, but brought neither reparations nor change in borders. The conflict is often compared to World War I, in that the tactics used closely mirrored those of the 1914 to 1918 war, including large-scale trench warfare, manned machine gun posts, bayonet charges, use of barbed wire across trenches and on no man's land, human wave attacks, and Iraq's extensive use of chemical weapons such as mustard gas against Iranian troops and civilians as well as Iraqi Kurds. When Saddam directed Chemical Ali to attack his own population of Kurds with mustard gas, the Americans blamed Iran rather than Saddam. It is only when Saddam became a political liability did the US openly claim that their once ally Saddam had in fact committed the war crime. Many of the precursors of Saddam's chemical warfare stockpiles were supplied by West German companies under the auspices of the USA. So, in fact, the US helped arm Saddam in the first place. A feature of the Iran-Iraq War that demonstrated the full extent of US involvement in the region was the Tanker War. The Tanker War started when Iraq attacked Iranian tankers and the oil terminal at Karg Island in 1984. Iran struck back by attacking tankers carrying Iraqi oil from Kuwait and then any tanker of the Persian Gulf states supporting Iraq. The air and small boat attacks did very little damage to Persian Gulf state economies, and Iran just moved its shipping port to Larak Island in the Strait of Hormuz. In 1982, with Iranian success on the battlefield, the US made its backing of Iraq more pronounced, supplying it with intelligence, economic aid, normalizing relations with the government broken during the 1967 Six-Day War, and also supplying weapons. President Ronald Reagan decided that the United States could not afford to allow Iraq to lose the war to Iran, and that the United States would do whatever was necessary to prevent Iraq from losing the war with Iran. President Reagan formalized this policy by issuing a National Security Decision Directive, or NSDD, to this effect in June 1982. Lloyd's of London, a British insurance market, estimated that the tanker war damaged 546 commercial vessels and killed about 430 civilian mariners.